Good morning, Frank.
Good morning, Kristen.
Here we are again.
Yes, another
Um,
Saturday.
I'd say we have to stop meeting like this, but it's too much fun, so we're going to keep
I'm
it up.
enjoying it as well.
Yeah, it's good. All right, so by way of introduction, I just wanted to refresh, if anybody's coming into these for the first time, this is the third one. First of all, I'll intro you and then intro myself, and then you can edit all you want.
Okay.
So you are the founder and CEO of Applied Visions, which is an application development company.
Yes, we
You
are.
also have a division, Secure Decisions, that makes Code DX, which is a product that catches the vulnerabilities, helps you catch the vulnerabilities in your software by combining a lot of other tools that people use to try to catch those vulnerabilities. And you acquired a company, Software Design Solutions, and it's run by Ed Kuzamchuk. Am I saying that properly?
Perfect.
Oh, good. He's a great guy, and he's technical, very technical, but he does, his company does the Internet of Things.
That's
so
right.
They develop applications for the Internet of Things. On my side, I now I founded and run a digital marketing management company. We're kind of like an outsourced marketing department. And we started in July of 2017. Before that, I was a revenue coach for tech companies mostly, but all types of companies for decades. So both of us have decades of experience, which is why
Before that, you were the editor and primary author of Marketing Technology Newsletter, which I subscribed to on paper.
Yeah, it was on paper back in the day. It was $275 a year, I think, or something. We had a pretty
and
good
worth every penny.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun. So we're here. You have about 80 people. I have about 30 people. My company's more virtual than yours, for sure. But we all have specialists in various areas that we manage, so we know a lot about management of technical resources, which is part of what we're going to be talking about all through this series. But today, we want to talk about your app is your business. Now, there might be a better way of saying that, and you might come up with it during this call. But that's what we want to talk about. So I've said enough now. You get to talk.
You've covered it pretty well. Your app is your business is probably a good way of summing up how we got to where we are, in that the two of us have spent these many years helping other businesses grow and thrive and weather the transitions of different technologies and different markets. And I joked about subscribing your newsletter on paper, but that was a big transition. Nobody does that anymore.
Yeah.
So you mentioned our various disciplines. They're all sort of focused on bringing as many technologies together as possible to create applications and products that help businesses grow and thrive in the digital age. And that's probably what we're going to be talking a lot about today, is what does that mean to be a business in the digital age?
And we're aiming these webinars at baby boomer business owners who have kind of been blindsided by the fast movement of tech. And you and I have been in tech so long, we're kind of used to it. It didn't move quite this fast in the early days, but it's definitely moving fast now.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I guess what we're really saying is, wild-eyed young entrepreneurs may not be interested in the things that we're talking about here because they all know better, but we're working with businesses who've grown and survived and made the transition through so many different changes in the world, and now they're just looking at how to weather this change, and hopefully we can help.
Yeah, I agree. And there's some wisdom in here that probably wouldn't hurt the younger set as well.
I didn't say they wouldn't benefit from watching these things. I'm just saying they probably won't.
Oh, they won't watch. Not that they won't benefit.
Yeah, they won't watch. That's kind of my point. It's kind of hard to tell an entrepreneur.
I have a lot of 30 and 20, 30, 40 somethings in our team, and they're enjoying it, but then they like us already. So,
Right.
All right. So the first thing I wanted to bring up and hear you talk about is the digital relationship. So at this moment, every single customer out there is expecting to have some kind of digital relationship with the companies that they do business with or that they want to do business with.
That's right.
So,
yeah, and I think a lot of times people don't kind of think of it that way, but if you stop and look at your business and your customers and your market and you look around at your day-to-day life, you start to realize how true that is. And there are always exceptions. There are various businesses that will always kind of be the way they were, and that's fine. But if you see this happening in your market to your business, you really need to pay attention to it. And that's that everybody's expecting more and more to be able to do business with you and to have a relationship with you pretty much all the time, whether they're in your store or office or factory or not. They just want a constant availability, constant accessibility. They just expect it because they've been led to expect it by all the other businesses they interact with in their lives.
yeah. And even in the business to business side, all business people are also consumers. And they're used to going to, my favorite example, Amazon, in the middle of the night and ordering something and getting it the next day if they need it.
And a lot of us can say, it's not fair to compare me to Amazon because, well, they're Amazon and I'm just me. But it's a natural tendency among the marketplace for people to get used to certain experiences and then start to expect those experiences elsewhere. And I'm as guilty as the next guy of getting a little bit annoyed at some online retailer or some brick and mortar retailer that I need to do something with, and I'll go to try and do something on the phone and take care of myself, and it doesn't work, and and I just get all grumpy because, well, why can't they do it? Everybody else does it. And it's a natural tendency, and you have to take a hard look at your customers and your business and say, is that going to apply, or does it already apply to my customers, and what should I do about that?
Yeah. So, and I think we were talking earlier about this before we got on the air, so to speak. We were thinking about the things people expect to be able to do. So they think they're going to be able to learn something. They want to communicate with someone, which is more the case than ever because of chat. Chat has had that tipping point, and now people are sort of expecting it wherever they go. As you brought up the other day, interestingly, Amazon is probably the worst at getting you in touch with a human being.
Yeah.
But they've been really good about getting you in touch with other customers.
Yeah, by the worst, I don't necessarily mean to say they're bad at it, but they put so much effort into making it not necessary.
Yes, there you go.
They make it very hard for you to figure out how to get a person on the phone. You can.
Yeah.
And once you've got them on the phone, they're great.
Yeah, you're right.
They don't really put it right in front of you because they give you the tools to take care of almost any problem you can have.
Yeah, that's true.
And they're really, really good at that.
That's interesting. That might have been their business philosophy. How can we, if they want this question answered, how can we answer that without involving a human being? And
well,
that's
it's interesting because you said it in the beginning of what you said. It's sort of interesting because you're harking back to your own book about the very first step in a digital presence or a web presence is to answer your customers' questions before they have to call you up and ask them.
Yeah.
Give them the information they need to sort of help them buy. And what's happened is people read your book and people do things like that. And it's gotten better and better. But now the logical next step is, okay, well, now I'm going to buy and I want to buy from you. And then I want help from you while I'm buying and after I'm buying. And maybe, yes, I do have some questions and I really don't want to pick up the phone and sit on hold. Where's your chat button? I'm used to those. So all those expectations for turning an informational visit to your website into a relationship and an interaction with your business is a natural progression for the customers. It's just not a very easy progression for us.
Yeah, I like the word interaction and transaction better than relationship because, as I said in my book, nobody wants the car dealer showing up for dinner.
Sure.
We don't buy things to make friends. We buy things because we want them. And then we have very specific questions and we expect answers. And I'm still floored to this day when I go to buy something, just regular consumer trying to find something very specific, and the manufacturer does not answer the most basic question, like
Right.
how big is it?
Yeah, right.
Does it fit in my cabinet, It's amazing to me how the basic questions still aren't answered, which is why the Amazon ask questions of the customers thing has been such a hit, because they do answer those questions.
They do. What's actually interesting is, and you're kind of right about, do I really want a relationship with the companies I'm buying from? Maybe, maybe not. But what happens more often than not is I kind of develop relationships with their other customers because the vehicles are there for me to interact with them, learn from them. And I confess, when I'm shopping for something, whether it's on Amazon or somewhere else, I go to the reviews pretty early on in the buying process now. It's like
Yeah,
I
and
kind
if
of
there
look
aren't any
over all the copy
reviews,
they wrote and say, what do the reviewers say?
yeah, exactly. And sometimes even a bad review, you can discount. You can say, "Oh, that guy was really interested in that, and I don't care much about that. Doesn't bother me." Um, or they had one bad experience, and you say, "Okay, well, but they shipped a new one, so it's okay."
Right.
So again, going back to our little list, we want to learn something. We want to communicate with somebody to get questions answered, and we do want to get very specific questions answered.
Right.
One thing that I keep talking to people about is that selling is really not selling, because everybody's tired of people selling them.
Yeah.
It's answering questions. And it's not overcoming objections. It's answering questions.
That's right.
It's very simple. And the last thing that they want now more than ever is something you were just talking about a few minutes ago, which is self-service.
Right. Well,
And
that's almost like table stakes.
yeah,
If you're selling something on the internet, and whether it's business to consumer or business to business, if you're offering up a product or even a service, people will expect to be able to accomplish an awful lot of their interaction with you without ever seeing you or talking to you or going to your store. It's just kind of expected. And again, as I said before, sometimes I find myself when I'm dealing with a business, if I can't do that, I sort of shrug my shoulders and think maybe I should shop somewhere else.
so this brings up an interesting question. Years ago, before the internet really took off, I used to be able to do what I always do as a revenue coach, which is to interview their customers to try to reverse engineer a successful sale and get all of those phrases that the customer says that the other customers would relate to, that you're not saying in your marketing stuff. So that was fine. And if I really did find the secret sauce that made this company different, then I could come back and say, okay, that's what we need to do. We need to talk about this in this way, and then you're going to stand out among your competition. Now the competition is so stiff, and everybody's kind of figured out search engine optimization, and they're saying all the same things. They've hired copywriters, and you really have to work hard to stand out. And I'm starting to recommend videos for clients because it works. I mean, it's a way for people to get to know you, especially in a service business. But the other thing is giving them what you're talking about, which is developing an application, not only for incoming customers, but for current customers.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's sort of an old saw that, your time and effort are better spent keeping a customer than finding a new one.
Yeah.
And you have to work really hard to do that because of all these expectations. And getting back to what we're talking about reviews and things, your customers can become an effective selling or promotional vehicle for your products. And conversely, they can become a real obstacle. You upset the wrong customer, and that customer will go out of their way to chase away other customers. So that whole relationship, I agree. Probably shouldn't call it relationships. There are transactions and then there are relationships, and and you can have a relationship with a customer and it can be a bad one. And I've probably been that bad customer sometimes when I've gotten sufficiently angry at a company, and I'll go out of my way to warn other people off, and that's probably not all that uncommon.
No, I agree. And there have been studies, people have done research and found that if somebody's dissatisfied, they'll tell 100 people. And if they're satisfied, they'll tell one or two.
I know. How sad is that?
Yeah. Well,
the happy customers just go on about their lives because they're happy customers.
Yeah, exactly. Which, by the way, is why you have to reach out and try to get those reviews, because reviews are getting really important. And we'll talk about that in another thing. I don't want to get into the marketing in this one. This is your webinar.
That's a whole topic.
Yes, it is. So talk a little bit about the app side of the business. I mean, you've developed a zillion apps, probably not that many, but a lot. All ranging from all different industries and consumer side, business side, government side. Give us some examples of people who needed to develop an app in order to be competitive.
That's a lot. Let's start a little bit with terminology, because I think it's important in the context of this discussion where we're talking about the digital relationship, whatever word we want to put on it. And that is, what do we mean when we say app? Today, and there was a brief time where the word app meant something on your phone or maybe on your iPad. It's grown a lot. And really today, the expectation that your customers have, and something that we do find ourselves helping companies achieve, is that your digital presence is your app. And it's everywhere, and they can do anything they need to do from any of the different ways that they reach you, which means they could begin a transaction with you on their desktop computer at work on your website and finish that transaction when they get home on their iPad, and then go and check on the status of that transaction from their phone while they're sitting in traffic. The expectation is it just all works. That their interaction with you is just one big app that has a couple of different doors into the room, the phone, the tablet, and we'll get into even devices later. The whole, can I shop from my refrigerator door type of thing. It's all, it's all real, and it's all important. And more importantly, it's what your customers expect. Whether your customers are consumers or you have a B2B relationship with them, people are just used to that. So I think I described earlier a bank that we had done some work with, where they specialized in lending to sort of high-powered lawyers and legal teams. And they had a whole online banking system, which they had licensed from a professional online banking systems company. That's a very big, important thing to build. We had nothing to do with building that. But they wanted to wrap that in their own sort of private service package of web presence and mobile presence, and basically letting their customers get the kind of service that they expect from a bank when you're a high-powered lawyer. And in their domain, they recognize that their customers are mostly out on the road somewhere. They're in court, they're in somebody else's office, they're not at their desk on their laptops. So it was very important for them to be able to do everything they needed to do from their phones, which is not the demographic you normally associate with being focused on an app on a phone. But it was very, very important to them, which isn't to say that they didn't expect to be able to go back to their desks on their nice, big, expensive 28-inch monitors and and finish whatever they were doing with their particular bank. So we've experienced that in banking. We've experienced that in insurance. Insurance brokerages were notoriously paper-driven and relationship-driven, telephone relation, real relationships types of things. And even there, this one agency we're working with recognized that they were so bogged down in the mechanics of that, they couldn't scale. It was, in fact, relationship-driven. The partners in the agency felt they needed to be talking to their customers. This was a commercial insurance brokerage, so dealing mostly with real estate developers. They needed to spend their time just working with their customers at the high end and not be bogged down by all the mechanics of everything that they were doing. So we automated their whole process, where people can request proposals for new, and this is something that happens all the time with regular customers in real estate. Guy buys a new building, he contacts his insurance broker to add this building to his stable of 15 or 20 other buildings, and wants to get a proposal for insurance in that building, and doesn't want it to take a week, wants to get it overnight. We've automated all that, so it's just a non-stop 24/7 digital service from their broker, and this broker is now able to scale considerably without going out and hiring teams of people. It's all being done electronically because they've automated the sort of the more mundane aspects of their business. And I use that term 24/7, which isn't one of my favorite terms, but it's part of our lives nowadays, and it's true. You poll most of your customers and say, is there any chance you might want to have any questions answered Saturday at 5 in the morning? And some of them are going to say, well, I'd like to, sure. And it's expected now.
Yeah, that brings up another point. One of the difficulties, I mean, every single aspect of business comes with its own pros and cons, and fun things and not so fun things. And one of the things that's difficult about all of this application development is once you give them what they said they wanted. And they always say, oh, that's really good. Thank you so much. By the way, can you now do this?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. By them, you mean our customers.
Our customers. Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Thank you. It's never ending.
The effusive gratitude for the cool thing that you gave them lasts about 5 minutes, and then
Yes.
they go, well, what about this? Well, what about that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in the extreme, you'll give them all this amazing capability, and there'll be one thing missing, and they go, figures.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've gone in and looked at an app, usually a smallish app, but even the larger ones, and examined it, went through the demo and everything. And then you get to this one thing that you absolutely have to have, and they don't have it, and you're done. You're just done.
Which I try to be more fair about that as a builder of these things. I know why that happens. I know how hard that is. And
yeah,
I'm often really annoying people like my son when he's complaining about his phone not working. And I'll say, do you realize how many things had to work just for that text message to go through? And I give him a big old lecture, and he kind of rolls his eyes at me.
Yeah.
It sucks, Dad. So it's those expectations, people have a right. We lull them into those high expectations by doing cool things in one area of the market. And it's perfectly natural and perfectly human for people to say, well, this is the way the world works now. So how come this other thing doesn't work that way?
Yeah. And it's partly, it's another argument for interviewing people before you develop an application. And I know that you do that in your business with your team. And the same thing's true of marketing, actually, on my side. If you go into this without that, you're automatically not going to have the thing that they really want.
Oh, absolutely.
And it could be the game changer. It could be what I call the gating factor, where, a lot of people say, oh, well, if it doesn't have that, then I don't want it.
Right. And more often than not, that one thing that everybody says they needed to have wasn't on the original list of things that business thought they needed to give. And that's a perfectly natural thing. And it's sort of interesting because the process that you're describing is something that sort of on the global timeline of technology is relatively new to my end of the business, but you've been doing it and writing about it forever on the marketing side of simply listening to the customers and hearing how they describe their lives and their problems in their words, and then trying to bring that back into the business to figure out how to give them what they're looking for. The same thing applies to technology, to apps, whether it's a website or a mobile app or whatever you're building. There was a period in the industry where whatever we built was great because it was new and people just accepted it. And you'll hear people talk about the software that they're running, whether they're at an airline gate or something, and they'll grumble that it's, hard to do this, that, and the other thing, but it's always been that way, and that's fine. But now, because the audience has gotten more sophisticated, when you start asking them how they might interact with this thing, and you sort of role play with them, this whole process we go through called user journey mapping, which is just that, just sitting down with real people with real problems and saying, let's walk through how this would go. And we'll take them down a certain path, and, and we'll see that this isn't the path they expected. And that interaction with them helps us understand how they expect to interact with the technology and create something that actually works for those people, rather than putting something out into the world and seeing what happens. It's a very important step.
Yeah, it's absolutely critical, and surprising how many people don't do it. I mean, when I give speeches and say, okay, we all know how to lose weight, tell me how, and everybody goes, eat less, exercise more. And then I say, okay, raise your hands. How many of you are doing it? Nobody's doing.
Not me.
Yeah. So the other thing that I've said a lot in my speeches is every single time I've done, I don't know how many, hundreds and hundreds, interviewed thousands of customers. And the same thing always happens. I go into the company and they say, this is what's important to our customer. These are the 10 things that are really important to our customer. And this is the top of the list. They have to have this. And then I go out and interview the customers, and their list is completely different.
That's right.
At the very least, the top thing is sort of like, oh yeah, but all the programs do that. I don't care about that.
That's right.
The fact that you're more elegant.
That's enlightening when you think your breakthrough is so great, and then you find out that your market just expects that.
Yeah, and
What
usually
else
it's
you
the
got?
thing that was the most difficult for your programmers to pull off.
Hmm.
And so they have this sense of pride. It's a big deal. But to the customer, it's like, well, yeah, boats are supposed to float, airplanes are supposed to fly. I mean, okay. So that's always a big shocker. And I bring it up because I think it's really, really, really easy to just assume, especially if you're kind of the user of that kind of thing and you think, well, they all think like I do,
Right.
but they don't.
And there's sort of another angle that we're all kind of guilty of, and I know I am. All of us who sit around and say, I've been doing this for this many years, that many years. When you have a lot of experience with things, you sort of are lulled into basing decisions on prior experience or prior memories. Well, we always did it this way, or
Mm-hmm.
this is how I started this business. Has always worked. And that experience is invaluable in many, many, many ways, but you have to, when it comes to this whole process, open yourself up to the realization that it's kind of different this time.
Mm-hmm.
Or it has, let me rephrase that. It has the potential to be different this time in this nature. So you have to be open to it. You've got to have an open mind.
Yeah, and on the app side, I think it's really important too to distinguish the standard things that people expect that you shouldn't mess with. I can't tell you how many times somebody has said in a website we develop for them and they say, "Oh, I want to put the search box on the left side at the bottom or something." And you're like, "No, no, no, no." That's
People have
not.
gotten used to things being a
Yeah,
certain ways.
yeah, and it should be where everybody always puts it, which is the upper right,
Mhm.
little magnifying glass or whatever. So I don't know. I don't know how well. I suppose you run into this all the time, and I suppose that you tell people, okay, but the things we don't want to mess with are these standard things that people will
Yeah.
expect.
And that part isn't too hard when you point that out. Part of it is just the awareness, and that there are standards, and the people we're working with are themselves consumers of digital experiences. So once you relate those two things together and kind of observe that they matter, that part's not so hard. It's the new part. It's the stuff that's specific to our business or to their business or to their product, and trying to be open to the fact that the relationship might be different now or in the digital way than it might have been before.
Mm-hmm.
But the benefit that our audience has, because the established business owners, is you have customers already. You're not going out to try and find customers. You have customers. You're trying to bring them along with you on this journey to a digital relationship. You can talk to them. You can show them things. You can invite them in to see some prototypes that you cooked up in the lab, or to discuss some ideas, or to do some of those user journeys I talked about. And what I found is customers like that. They like being part of that. You don't have to struggle to get them to agree to do that. Most businesses, particularly in the B2B space, have a few long-term customers who would be flattered to be invited to help invent the next generation of your business's service or product or whatever. I participated in a lot of those things, and it's remarkable because people enjoy being listened to. And then when you come back after all this and you launch your product and you're talking to the customer, they'll say, "Hey, I saw you did that thing that I told you about. I saw that in there." They have a sense of ownership over that, and then they'll tell other people.
Yeah,
So
it's true.
it's a very rewarding process, and it's a very valuable process, and it shouldn't be scrimped on.
So, Frank, how do you think of your business as an app? I know we were talking about that the other night, and you were saying, okay, you've been running a company, you've been keeping all the plates spinning. We were laughing that millennials probably don't know what that is.
Yeah,
It was a vaudeville act where
Google it.
some guy would start a plate spinning on top of a stick, and then he'd have 10 of them, and he'd be running back and forth, keeping them all spinning, which is what it's like when you're running a business.
Yeah, I think most business owners can appreciate that.
Definitely can relate to the spinning plates. But the hard part about this is you have to think about your business in a completely new way from the customer's perspective, or it's not going to work.
Well, you do. You have to think, for starters, from the perspective that you never close.
Mm-hmm.
always reachable.
Mhm.
The good news is that if you do that, you don't need as many people to provide the services that you used to provide, because you've got systems now that will do it for you. But you have to have those systems in place. But I think that's probably, as I said before, I don't really like the phrase 24/7 because it just, I don't know. I'm not sure why I don't like it, but I don't like it. But it's the mindset that you have to have, that you are always available. Your business is always available. And that works to your customers' benefit, but it can also work to your benefit, because your business is always, or can be always, part of their life. It can be in their pocket, depending on the nature of your business and what kind of relationship you have with your customers. It might be to your benefit to have your company in their pocket. If you've got a mobile app that provides some kind of service that your customers might want on a regular basis, and they can just take out their phone and do something with your app that they might otherwise do with somebody else's app, right out of the gate, you've got a connection to your customer when they need you. You didn't have to call them. You didn't have to wait for them to call you. They just needed your app. We're doing an app right now for an industrial company. They make shop floor equipment. Not important what it is, but it's the kind of thing that takes some thought, and somebody has to go into a factory floor and measure things and figure out ceiling height and this. It's in the lighting space. And we're building an app for them. It goes by the general category of configurators. These things have been around forever as little cardboard things where you slide the thing up and down and there's a little number in the window. And people are used to that as a concept. And it's a very handy thing for somebody to have when they're standing in a shop floor, to be able to look up reference data. And when it was a piece of cardboard, the only useful information on there as far as your business is concerned is A, it's helping them pick the right products to use, and B, your phone number's there so they can call you. When you do that with an app, A, you can give them a lot more capability than just sliding a piece of cardboard up and down and having little numbers scroll through a window. You can let them enter all kinds of information in, do all kinds of calculations for them, do a much better job of presenting your products that solve that problem for them there on the spot. And then they can tap a button and request a quote, or even go ahead and buy it because maybe you've got their credit card. You have, instead of sending a sales rep out to that factory floor, they're doing the selling for you. It's not to say you shouldn't have a sales team. It's not to say you don't want to send a sales rep out to that shop floor from time to time, because there's all sorts of other opportunities there for you. But for this one particular transaction, by providing an app that solved a problem, which is that it did some calculations, and there's all kinds of cool things you can do that now with augmented reality. They could take a picture of the shop floor and point to where they want the light, and they could figure it out for you. You can do all that sort of stuff. That's helping them do their job. And in the end of their job, they're choosing your product and they're buying your product. So the app lets them do that work. This gets back to this I was saying before, that it's not little islands of apps and websites and so forth, because the app is letting them do that work in that shop floor. Then when they say they want a quote, that's going back to your home office systems, wherever they are, probably up in the cloud nowadays, but it's talking to your back office systems to generate that quote, which goes into your product catalog and your sales database and your customer relationship management system to record the transaction with this customer, because as a regular customer, there's all this stuff going on in the background to generate this quote, to keep this relationship going with this customer. And maybe he or she is doing it on Sunday at 4:00 in the afternoon. And you're not there, you're not in the office, no one else is in the office, but this work is getting done because they had to do it on Sunday because that's when the shop is closed for maintenance, something like that.
Mhm.
You can extrapolate that whole scenario to dozens of different types of businesses and types of relationships. Having yourself in your customer's pocket can be a pretty powerful thing.
So how does a company go about the steps? What are the steps if they want to start building an app? And I mean, if they were doing in a perfect world,
In a perfect world, they tell us.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you help your clients do so that it turns out as good as it can, and follow the right process?
In an imperfect world, In a perfect world, you would just say, okay, we're going to do this and start down this path of analyzing the whole problem and so forth and so on. Some people have the wherewithal to do that. They have the bandwidth, they have the resources, and that's great when that happens. In an imperfect world, you start small. You start with one thing. So in the example I just gave you, it started with just the configurator app. They didn't have the ability to generate quotes and provide that data. All that information was sort of stuck in some legacy back office systems. There was no way to get at that information, so we couldn't offer that. The philosophy was, well, you're giving out these paper configurator cardboard things and it has your phone number and your website on it. Well, the app will do the same thing. It'll give you a phone number and the website, and one little benefit is you tap the phone number and it calls you. It was a small start. It wasn't that hard to build that app because it was doing just what this paper card did, with maybe a little bit of extra goodies because we had a computer doing the work now. But it didn't have any of the legacy tie-in that they know and we know they would eventually love to have, to be able to paint that whole picture that I painted before. And now that's the next step. So you can do these things incrementally. It doesn't have to be a big bang. You don't have to spend millions of dollars and thousands of hours before you have anything useful in the field. In fact, we try as hard as possible to do in everything we do, to do it incrementally, to get something valuable out into the market as quickly as possible, to show your customers that we're starting to do this, to learn from your customers the inevitable, oh, we never knew that they thought that way before. And when you're doing this with apps and things, there's ways of getting that data back. You can sort of track how people are using it. You can solicit feedback, give them a chance to make comments or whatever. You can start gathering data. So we always try and get out in the field as fast as possible. I think in an earlier session, we started talking a little bit about what agile means, and you'll hear that word thrown around. But one of its fundamental tenets is build things in small pieces, get them out there as quickly as possible, learn from them, and then integrate that learning back into the next steps.
Yeah, and that's a really good point from a business perspective, because both you and I, over the years, have seen people decide that they are going to do the big bang and they invest in it. Maybe they get outside investment or something. They spend way longer than they thought they were going to spend. And they put it out in the market. And because they didn't get that feedback as they went, and sometimes it's that gating factor and they just left it out.
Yep, or they just went down a path that wasn't optimal for the customer experience because they didn't get that feedback exactly. And the technology today, fortunately, gives you the ability to do that. In years past, there was sort of a circular thing. One of the reasons people did that big bang is because just the nature of the technology was such you had to build so many things just to get the first piece of value out. We used to call it the infrastructure tax because you had to build it all yourself. You had to build the back office systems. You had to build the pipelines. You had to create all this plumbing just to be able to get that quote out into the customer's hands. Now you have a lot of things, or we have a lot of things at our disposal that lets us do these things incrementally. It's not as hard as it used to be to connect these pieces together because we've learned a lot. So you can build them in pieces, which is a nice benefit when compared to doing things like building a new store or putting up a mall or building a new factory because you think this product is going to be very popular and you need to expand your capacity. Those are really big decisions that you still have to make. And at some moment you have to say, okay, I'm going to authorize this $5 million to build this factory and let's hope that we sell enough product. In many, many cases with the digital technology, you can do it in steps. It helps if you're committed to the long haul, to understanding where it might eventually lead, but you can get there in increments and try things out and learn from them and change direction when it's necessary to do so.
Yeah, and something we haven't talked about very much, but I'm very familiar with from my own experience with companies in this space, but integration of applications has become a really big deal because we do have an infrastructure. We do have legacy systems that we've used. We have data sitting in databases, and we need to access that data, even though it's an older system. So you don't want to build that system from scratch. You're using it. It's okay. It's good enough. and you need to access that in order to do the quote or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So integration between applications has also become a big deal, and it's growing constantly.
It has, and in a sense, this is where this, well, everybody's doing it issue in this market kind of helps the business owner, in that there's so much demand for that kind of integration because of everything that we're talking about, that the vendors of these applications got the message and started building that integration into their products. QuickBooks, which probably half the audience of this video use because it's great for small business, has an application programming interface, an API is what we call it, which really means that they've just sort of opened the doors to their data to the outside world. So you can build an app that can go into QuickBooks and get some data, or that can push a transaction into QuickBooks to register a sale. I don't know of a currently supported piece of enterprise software that doesn't have some sort of an API anymore. Everybody has recognized that. If you've got legacy systems in the back office that aren't supported anymore, if there's an AS400 back there that's been running for 15 years, you have a little bit of work ahead of you. You'll have to create your own interfaces to that. It's well understood. We all know what we need to do. It's just one of those roll up your sleeves and do it type of things. But if you're using commercial software that's currently supported, in all likelihood, it already has those APIs. And then people like us can come along and just tie these things together and just make it all work.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, there are a lot of companies now that are offering APIs for the commercial, for the successful, like Zapier, or yeah, Zapier, is that how you say it? Zapier, Zapier. They're one of the companies that offer sort of vanilla connections between apps.
Right.
So that's becoming another aspect of this that you need to understand. It's especially important because a programmer could come to you, or you could have a programmer who says, okay, we need to pull data from this thing via, an API, and I'll write it for you. And it could be that there's one already out there that's written that'll work just fine.
Right.
So you have to be a little savvy about this. In another webinar, we're going to talk about managing your technical resources, because that's what baby boomer business owners need to learn how to do. You can't manage what you don't understand. We're trying to help them understand the whole picture of this from a strategic perspective.
Right.
And then give them specific instructions on how to manage these aspects. And that's one of them, that programmers will tell you things they want to do because that's what they've always done, or they like programming instead of using templates or integration programs.
We're all subject to those biases, whether it's in the software world or the physical world. The contractor who always does things a certain way and isn't aware of new materials and new fasteners that are available just because, well, he's always done it that way. There's plenty of people in my business who think that way. It's like, this is what I've always done, I'll just do it again. You have to have an open mind and an active process of looking at what's become available in the industry. But the other side of that coin is you can't just go grab the first cool tool that shows up because it sounds cool. Sometimes they don't work. So there's a balance in there of staying on top of the industry, keeping tabs of what's available and what can be done, and making sure that the tools you're looking at don't have unintended side effects. That's probably the best way to look at it. Is you have to be responsible about every tool that you use. And we could do a whole session on open source software, and people hear about that all the time. That open source stuff, that's free, right? So that's what we should use because it's free. And yeah, there's a lot of powerful open source software that does the job and works great. And then there's other open source software that not so much. So you have to be responsible about all these decisions.
Yeah, and I think when I started the Zhivago Partners, the first thing I did was hire an infrastructure person. I call her my app whisperer, but she was the first person I hired because I knew that we were going to live or die by the applications that we use to run the machine that creates all of this stuff and does all this project work and the content management and everything that we're doing. I mean, it's just project management software, for example.
Yeah.
So that's something that baby boomer business owners need to understand, is they need somebody who can, in an unbiased way and with some tech savvy, look at the options available when you're deciding, what we're going to go with or how we're going to even build an app that's going to interact with other things in your business.
That's a really good point. And, as a builder of systems, I tend to look at everything as just raw materials for things to build. But there's a whole other side of technology that you just described, which is the wealth of tools and products and platforms and whatever you want to call them available for just doing the day-to-day business of your business. I mentioned QuickBooks before because it's ubiquitous. Everybody needs an accounting program, and there are others as well. But as you said, there's project management tools, there's collaboration tools, there's planning tools, there's a wealth of tools that do useful things for an enterprise that are not immediately obvious how they would work or how they would fit in. And they just require that kind of process as well, that kind of understanding of how these things work, how they work together. And an app whisperer is a good thing to have in any organization.
Yeah, she's been invaluable. Okay.
And that's actually somebody you want to have inside your organization.
Yes, I agree. Yes, no bias. Okay, so the last thing we want to cover in this session today is we've talked about attracting customers, keeping customers, making it possible, answering their questions, making it possible for them to do things with your company when you're sleeping. But another thing that you brought up in our prior discussion before we got on this call was the valuation of your business. And, a baby boomer business owner might have an established business that he or she wants to sell. And if cars are all the rage and you're still selling buggy whips, you're not going to have much luck. And that's where we're ending up. You will be judged by the infrastructure of your business and the apps that you've chosen and how successful you've been with those apps, how usable they are, how modern they are, how much they address customers' real concerns. So this is a bigger deal than just running your business. It's also about selling the business.
It is, or, there's a dozen reasons to worry about your business's valuation, even if you're not interested in selling, if you're borrowing or whatever. The key point that you make is you don't want to be viewed, well, you're going to be viewed in comparison to other businesses in your space.
That's right.
Your peers. You don't want to be viewed as a vintage business. I mean, I love vintage stuff, but I recognize that it's vintage stuff. I might buy a buggy whip for the novelty of it, but not to actually use it. You want to be viewed as a modern business when you're compared to your peers, because it has a tremendous impact on the perceived value of your business. It may be frustrating because you say, well, I have to spend money to do that, and that's going to hit my earnings. And, that's a trade-off. You can continue to run a business for its earnings as it generates earnings. And there's perfectly valid strategies that say, I'm just going to run this business until it kind of winds down. And that's fine. That's a choice that people make. But if you're in a situation where you're being compared against other companies that do what you do, and if they start doing it differently, you have to ask yourself if you need to follow that path in order to compete with them, in order to hold your valuation up in comparison to them. And then there's the other angle on this, which I think we've touched on in a previous session. The word disruption gets thrown around a lot in business nowadays. And it's a scary thought. It says somebody may come along and figure out how to do what you do using new technologies in a different way. And we could do a whole session on that. But when you're looking at how you are addressing modern technology, look at it not only in terms of how you compare to other people doing what you do, how you can improve your own efficiencies that way, but is there a way that technology could fundamentally change the way people do the business that you're in? We have one client in the shipping space, which is another one of these businesses that's traditionally been managed with phones and telexes and faxes and such. And the technology is gaining importance in their space. Uber has a shipping app. It's called Uber, now I forget. Not Uber Shipping, Uber Cargo, Uber some. But it's sort of a lesser known branch of their business. It's the way that Uber's trying to use their technology to sort of scale out horizontally into different industries. But I can use an Uber app to get something shipped to China or to some other place. And
I had no idea.
It's working on what's called less than load, where they find available space on containers and things. So it's sort of what a full-scale shipping and logistics company might view as small potatoes, but it's one of those things nipping at their heels that they ought to be thinking about. Is that going to scale up to where somebody could ship 1,000 containers using an app and not having to call me up and expect me to do it for them? It's just, you have to look over your shoulder with things like that.
Yeah, and it's very difficult. As I've studied companies over the years, I was always impressed with 3M, because in their product manager product plan, they had the sunsetting of the product.
Mm-hmm.
They actually built the demise of the product into the plan. And that was forcing them to always be thinking, okay, we might saturate the market. We might be overridden by somebody else. How can we find the next right thing for our business? And be constantly, I mean, the whole Post-it thing, I mean, they ended up making easel-sized Post-it notes, which are actually really helpful in a room.
And that came out of their internal R&D, and there's a great story about that. I think they were featured in Good to Great. I don't remember if they won one of the companies at Good to Great, but before disruption was a buzzword, they practiced the art of self-disruption.
Yeah.
They set out exactly as you said. They had labs in several different places, staffed with scientists whose whole job was just to come up with stuff that would make their other products obsolete. Mm-hmm. I think the Post-it, the story, which may be apocryphal, was that the Post-it came out of some other research. Mm-hmm. They were trying to solve some other problem, and the scientists ended up with this adhesive that
didn't stick.
Didn't leave a residue. And he said, he had one of those wait a minute moments. An example of a company that didn't do a good job of that is Kodak. And they're sort of legendary for sort of a last minute struggle to get into digital imaging and get into print, other ways to try and catch up to the bandwagon that had passed them, as opposed to disrupting themselves. Yeah,
it's sad. It's really sad when that happens. And it's one of the reasons we're starting this whole series. Is I feel really sorry for the companies that have built a very solid business, and then there they are, and they're looking around going, wait, what happened? I mean,
it seems really unfair.
Yes, it does.
And I sympathize as well. And, in our businesses, we've had to, you could be still publishing that printed newsletter.
No, I couldn't.
Great. We've had to keep up.
Yeah.
But to have a good, solid, successful business building something that people want and people buy and people are happy with, and then to have the rug pulled out from under you because some technology came along that just changed the way people do whatever it is your product does, really feels unfair. But that's the way of the world.
Yeah, I think I was lucky in the sense that I got started in the tech business, and I saw how quickly things changed, and somebody could just be out of business.
Right.
I mean, nobody makes floppy disks anymore.
Yeah, right.
I've been cleaning out my garage, and there's like these, 5 1/4 inch floppy disks. I mean, how could you even read that anymore?
That's right.
So it changes, and you have to go where the river of revenue is. I wrote a book called that once. Mm-hmm. What to do when the money stops flowing. But the secret to that is always to go back to your customers. And the beauty, as you said earlier today, the beauty of this is if you have customers already, they will tell you what they're thinking. Yeah, and they're happy to do it. I've never had anybody turn me down for an interview.
Well, it's interesting because two industries I just happen to have noticed of late, for very differing reasons, have gotten really good at this. Every time I stay at a hotel, and it doesn't seem to matter what hotel it is, I get a questionnaire. Mm-hmm. And they're well-designed questionnaires. They take just the right amount of time that I'll carry it through to the end. They give me just the right ways of answering that I don't feel like it's intrusive. And the other is healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Oh, God,
and
yes.
I know that healthcare is largely driven by some shifts in the way that insurers work, and in particular how Medicare and Medicaid judge places. I'm less concerned about the reasons and more just about the process. And every single doctor's visit, every single interaction I have with pretty much any healthcare provider, right down to my local GP, I get a questionnaire.
Yeah.
I get, an evaluation of services. What could we do better? And that willingness to ask your own customers, how am I doing, is a very valuable thing. And as I said earlier, most customers, if you ask them the right way and it's not overly intrusive, are happy to tell you. And they might be grateful to have the chance. Well, I've always wanted to tell you that this thing over here, just give them the chance.
Yeah. I do recommend not doing surveys until you've interviewed people in person in open-ended conversation.
Oh, yeah.
I talk
Yeah,
about
I
that in
didn't mean
my
to jump
book.
on the process. I was just observing. And
Yeah, no, I agree. My husband's fighting cancer, as you know, and I can't tell you how many questionnaires we've gotten. So,
and there
yes.
are some businesses where a phone call isn't possible or practical or maybe even welcome, but a survey is. I didn't mean to imply that everybody should be doing surveys. And you're absolutely right. If you can call a customer.
No, yeah, and most
Get
of
them on
them,
the phone,
I've
do
not
it.
run into a business yet where I couldn't call a customer. And I again, in my book, I talk about this in great detail. Here's how you send the email. Here's how you get them on the phone. Here are the questions you ask, all open-ended questions. So you don't lose. And even at the end, I say, is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't ask you?
Mm-hmm.
And usually they'll say, oh, no, you covered it. But, I do want to stress this one thing, or let's go. So then they really tell you the thing at the end that they really felt was the most important, the number one thing on their list, which is super important for you to know. And you don't
That's
have
right.
to interview that many. I just need to say this. You can interview 5 to 7 people of a given type, and you're going to start to see the trend. You'll start to know what's important to them, how they buy, the phrases they use, and people say things about how they buy with exactly the same sentence that somebody else said in the interviews, and they've never talked to each other.
That's right.
So it's very interesting. You will get trends.
People are people, and
Yeah.
we all have trends.
Yeah.
And of
All
course,
right.
fully half the people watching this video are going to go to Amazon right now and look for your book because there's no bookstore in their town anymore.
That's true.
Because that whole industry has changed because
Oh yeah, that's a
of the
buggy whip.
disruption of Amazon. So
Yeah, I know.
when you're looking for that book on Amazon, ask yourself if you're a bookstore.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. It's Roadmap to Revenue, by the way, everybody, just in
Good
case.
book.
All right. Well, thank you, Frank. This has been great as usual, and I look
Always
forward to
fun.
doing another one.
I do too.
All
I'll
right.
see you next time.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, Kristen.